what the indicator should deploy.
Navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed and we are seeing significant deceleration.
We're getting signals from MRO.
Tango Delta.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the signs of past life.
Historijsko slijetanje rovera Perseverance na Mars za nas je važno zbog kratera nazvanog Jezero po malom mjestu u Bosni i Hercegovini. Njegovo slijetanje omogućila je i Dragana Perković Martin, inžinjerka NASA sa 13 godina iskustva rada na radarskim sistemima. Ona je dio tima od 50 ljudi zaduženih za radarsko praćenje same letjelice. Dragana, dobrodošla na N1, evo i po drugi put. Zaista, evo cijenimo vaše prisustvo.
Hvala puno što ste me pozvali ponovo.
Hvala, Dragana. EDL, jedan je od najvažnijih, u biti najkrucijalnijih komandi koje je Perseverance morao proći i gledajući to slijetanje rovera iz NASIne kontrolne sobe, da kažemo nešto što nije moglo biti ni kontrolisano, iako je praćeno iz kontrolne sobe. Ništa se tu nije moglo više učiniti, nego vjerovati komandama koji su prethodno programirane. Tih 7 minuta terora, 7 minutes of terror, bile su nevjerovatno teške i za svakoga ko je pratio slijetanje, a posebno za vas. Evo, kako ste vi proživjeli tih 7 minuta EDL-a?
Bilo je veoma uzbudljivo. I to vam je, znači, EDL je ulaz, spuštanje i onda na kraju sletanje. I u toku tih 7 minuta ja sam bila sa mojim timom, otprilike 50 ljudi koji su radili na radaru za spuštanje. Taj radar je proizvodio podatke o tome koliko se brzo letjelica spušta ka tlu Marsa i koliko je udaljena letjelica u svakom od tih trenutaka od površine Marsa. Bilo je jako uzbudljivo. Sve te emocije su bile pomešane. Nešto što ja nikad nisam očekivala jeste da ću ja biti kod kuće kada se ovo dešava. Ja sam uvek zamišljala taj trenutak kao jedno veliko timsko iskustvo, da ću biti zajedno sa mojim timom u laboratoriji, ali naravno to se nije desilo. Ono što se desilo i što je u stvari bilo baš lepo jeste da sam ja to proslavila sa mojom porodicom kod kuće.
To je zaista i za slavlje bilo. Evo, nekoliko je trenutaka u historiji gdje se možemo sjetiti gdje smo tačno bili tog momenta. Slijetanje Perseverance-a na Mars je bio jedan od trenutaka gdje se ja isto tako mogu sjetiti gdje sam tačno bila u koje vrijeme i šta sam radila. Mnogo je toga prvih, da kažem the first, mnogo je prvih eksperimenata koji nosi sam rover sa sobom, ovaj najsofisticiraniji rover ikada načinjen u ljudskoj historiji, kao što je to recimo Ingenuity, prvi helikopter na Marsu, MOXIE, objasnit ćemo sada što je to, ali isto tako i snimci slijetanja u real time-u, da kažemo, snimci u HD verziji koji smo imali priliku vidjeti kako je to izgledalo, zaista slijetanje, radarsko traženje najboljeg mjesta za slijetanje, način slijetanja ovoga puta, ne kao recimo kad je Curiosity bio ili Opportunity, sada potpuno drugačiji način imamo i slijetanja. Ajde da objasnimo prvo Ingenuity. Zašto je važan Ingenuity? Ovo će biti, dakle, prvi helikopter, prvi, evo za nekoliko dana, čak oko 11. aprila, ne ranije od 11. aprila, bit će testni let prvog helikoptera ikada na drugoj planeti u našem sistemu. Zašto je važan ovaj test za nas, za buduće misije, ali za sve ono što pokušavamo da radimo na Marsu?
Znači, to je prva letjelica koja će leteti na nekoj drugoj planeti. Veoma je bitno zato što je to, kažem, prvi put je da mi pokušavamo da u stvari nešto podignemo sa tla druge planete, što je veoma zanimljivo. Helikopter je izabran kao jedna od tehnologija koja je bila najmogućnija u stvari da se do toga dospe. I u stvari ono što ja znam jeste da se mi nadamo da će se helikopter odvojiti od rovera danas ili sutra. I to je veoma veliko uzbuđenje. Mi jedva čekamo da vidimo kada će se to desiti. Ali šta to u stvari znači ako ta tehnologija, znači ako mi u stvari to uspemo, ako uspemo da uzdignemo taj helikopter. To znači da, na primjer, neke sledeće misije moći će da koristi istu tehnologiju sa možda više instrumenta na helikopteru, da bi recimo mogli da idu dalje da istražuju na neka mesta koja nisu pristupna roveru, jer rover mora da se vozi donekle i ako se nađe na nekom terenu iz koga ne može da izađe, to je veoma nezgodno. Zato inžinjeri ovde na zemlji u stvari ne žele da stave rover u takvu situaciju gde ne može da izađe. A helikopter koji bi mogao da poleti, mogao bi da ode i da izvidi šta se dešava u tim nekim delovima koje nisu pristupni roveru.
How exciting is that, Yvette? Now, okay, ladies, so the rover's mission is very ambitious, to seek signs of ancient life on the red planet. It will be the first of NASA's 5 rovers to sniff around for traces of long dead Martians, inhabitants of a world that for its first billion years or so was warmer than the dusty planet we see today. What do you think Percy will find in Jezero crater this time? Yvette, or what do you hope
thank
for?
You so much for? I'm very hopeful that there's going to be even some trace amounts of signs of life. I mean, this is what we hope for the future. That'll give us indications of how we can build on the science and what more we can do. So it's I think it's a very exciting time for science, for STEM, for NASA.
For NASA and for the humanity, just to think that humanity can be extended to a different planet, to another planet, that is exciting on itself. Shayla, what do you think? What do you hope for that Percy will find?
Well, I definitely, we talk about the microbes, so the life that they mentioned that they may find will be microbes. I do hope they find some really interesting minerals and resources, like a lot of like what we found on the moon, because of craters and meteors and meteorites that have hit the planet itself. So I'm really excited about those things, as I've taken a geology 101 course. So I love rocks now. So I'm excited to see what the terrain is made of, learn more about what the terrain is made of.
How important is it to know the geology and geological systems on Mars for example, future human missions?
I definitely, so I took a Geology 101 fast track course, which actually now has made me love the geology, but it is important. That course definitely taught me that understanding the history of the planet is in the aspect of the geology or the planetary science. I say geology for Earth, but the planetary science of that planet. So understanding the rocks, the soil, digging deep into the Earth, to know where that planet came from, what was inhabited possibly on that planet in the past, and where it's going to go in the future. So that's a lot of times when you can study the inner depths of that planet, you'll learn more about it from the past and its future. So it's definitely really important.
Yvette, space systems improve our knowledge of the physical universe through celestial observation and planetary exploration. What do you think? How well have we done?
We have come a long way. I have to say, I give a lot of kudos to all the engineers working on human spaceflight, the evolution of technology, both for your spacesuit, for that you're going to wear, and then also for the spaceships and technology around how you thrive and what kind of systems keep humans alive in orbit, beyond orbit, and what eventually will be thriving in hostile environments. And I have to say that course that we took together, I took the same planetary geology course with Shayla. It was actually to test also geological tools and what would it mean to be in a pressurized spacesuit environment on Mars, on the moon, and what does it mean to collect samples? What does it mean to not contaminate those? How do we bring those back safely? How do we not contaminate us as people? How do we not contaminate the actual elements that we're coming into contact with? All of that science has evolved, and we are rapidly becoming more and more keen on what do we do best? How are we learning from our lessons? And how are we going to make sure the future has an evolution of technology that makes sense for us. So it's really exciting to even think about how quickly our technology has evolved in even just the last 5 years.
Exactly. If I always say this, if we were talking about this 10 years ago, somebody would say, hey, you ladies are crazy. But we're not crazy because we're talking about it now. It's no longer science fiction. And planetary protection is very important on Mars, but also vice versa on Earth. When we cache the samples that Perseverance will collect and bring them with a newest mission, another mission, the future mission that will go to Mars, bring them back to Earth. How important is it, that term planetary protection? How will we examine those samples from Mars? Shayla.
I definitely know from when the moon missions, a lot of things will correlate for the Mars mission. So of course, everything will be vacuum sealed. It'll be definitely protected. It'll be taken a delicacy as they go and figure out what it's made of, what's going on in these special tubes with these special gloves. As the scientists explore more about the Martian soil, the Martian rocks, and as we bring in any samples that we bring back, it will definitely be in a very protected environment so that the Earth environment does not give false readings, and that Mars environment does not contaminate, or any type of toxic entities can kind of expose to Earth that we may not have ever been exposed to, that can cause harm. So I know that that's the process and the way to definitely take care of the samples and learn more about it in a safe way.
Chris Mattman is the Division Manager for the Artificial Intelligence, Analytics and Innovation Development Organization in the Information Technology and Solutions Directorate at NASA JPL. Dr. Mattman is also JPL's first principal scientist in the area of data science. I think I need a day to list all the amazing things Chris is doing. Chris, welcome to In1.
Ika, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And you could just say I'm the CTO. That's easier. There you go.
There, CTO. All right, so Chris, NASA's Mars rovers have been one of the great scientific and space successes of the past 2 decades now. And you said all of the autonomy that you see on our latest Mars rover is largely human in the loop, meaning it requires human interaction to operate. Can you explain this for us?
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds a little kind of unfair, to say humans being in the loop, like it's something bad. So I just want to give some context to that. And actually, it's my framing, so I'm just going to cover up my tracks a little. So basically, like, the Mars rovers, these big car-sized, vehicles that you see today, like Volkswagen Bug, like the 2012 Curiosity rover or 2020 Perseverance that just landed, they, inside of them, have these processors, which aren't too powerful. They're like iPhone 1 processors. Why? Well, the reason is that the things that we put into space, we want them to be radiation hardened. When you put hardware into space, it messes with the hardware. There's this cosmic radiation stuff that basically, flips bits from ones to zeros and zeros to ones. And so the things that we put into space, we want to be kind of validated and tested and resilient to that cosmic radiation. And so because of that, it's put us on sort of the downtick of what types of processors and things like that, what types of brains could exist inside of these sort of massive, amazing, inspirational investments. So that said, with the lack of super, computing power on these things, a lot of the stuff that we do terrestrially for autonomy, or that you can do on your desktop computer with these amazing GPUs and machine learning and things like that, we can do those, but we have to sort of have humans involved in sort of selecting, prioritizing data, picking out the targets and things like that, and then let the rover do its thing on its own after that. And so that's what I mean by human in the loop.
So JPL team is working on Mars robot autonomy to make future rovers more intelligent, to enhance safety, to improve productivity, and in particular to drive faster and further. Is this, and how will this be possible in the future? Now we're talking about AI.
Yeah, Ika. So the next Mars rovers, we like to say, they're going to have the big brains in it. If I, quote Avengers, Endgame, one of my favorite Marvel movies, that this is where we're going to need to pull the big brains. We need a bigger than his, we need the big brains, over here and things like that. And so those future Mars rovers will have what we call high performance space-like computing chips in them, GPU-like chips that have that power that we can do things like drive-by science. And so you can imagine the rover, Earth to Mars, communicating with it, light time, 11 minutes round trip, to send a message there, get a reply back. That's a very thin pipe. And today, the Mars rover team, the surface operations, they take a couple hundred images a day to figure out their science targeting and their planning on that thin pipe for where to go, where to drive, what to select for the next day. But tomorrow, with the big brains on the rover, they're going to be able to have the rover, instead of sending back a couple hundred images, because images are expensive to send back, and things like that, they're big, we could send back maybe 1 million captions of what it saw. And so instead of giving you an image of a regolith with rocks out in the distance or veins that may indicate there's water there and things like that, you get back a nice text caption that you believe that says basically, oh, here's what's out there. And text is much cheaper than images to send back. If we could run that on the rover, then we're playing. Then we can do all sorts of things. Then we could do drive-by science. Then we can do this in the future. And the future rovers are going to need to do things like this.
NASA is targeting no earlier than April 11 for the Ingenuity Mars helicopter to make the first attempt at powered, controlled flight of an aircraft on another planet before the 4-pound, 1.8 kilogram rotorcraft can attempt its first flight. However, both it and its team must meet a series of daunting milestones. What milestones? The answer to that we are seeking from NASA JPL's communications engineer, Josh Miller. Josh, welcome back to N1. Thank you for joining.
Hi, Ika. Thanks for having me back. So nice to be here.
Good to have you. Ingenuity is still attached to Perseverance. It should detach today. What are the next steps, Josh?
So the next steps, so right now, Ingenuity is still attached to the rover, but the next steps are going to be to actually lower the helicopter from the rover and actually detach it, place it onto the ground on Mars, and then back away from it. Meaning that the rover is going to drive away from the helicopter.
That is fantastic. So flying in a controlled manner on Mars is far more difficult than flying on Earth. Obviously, the red planet has significant gravity, about 1/3 of the Earth's gravity, but its atmosphere is just 1% as dense as Earth's at the surface. So during Martian daytime, the planet's surface receives only about half of the amount of solar energy that reaches Earth during its daytime. And nighttime temperatures can drop as low as -90 degrees Celsius, which can freeze and crack unprotected electrical components. So how confident is JPL at this point that Ingenuity will survive its first Martian night?
So confidence in surviving it with temperatures, we're pretty confident. Before even going to space, all of our hardware, the helicopter included, goes through all kinds of different environmental tests, whether that is temperature in this case. We actually take it through all the different temperatures and more that it'll see while it's in flight or while it's on another planet. But also other things like vibration testing, thermal testing, and also putting it into one of our vacuum chambers, whether that's a small one or a big one, whenever we have everything put together into one big system. So we're fairly confident, since it's gone through all of those different kinds of tests and survived.
Okay, so Josh, but why is this flight important? This is a question that everybody asks, especially when we have our Mars Mondays on Clubhouse, whenever we're talking to the audience one-on-one. Why is flying on another planet so important, and how can humanity benefit from this?
So this flight is very important because it is the first flight that we will have ever done, and we meaning JPL or NASA or even humanity. This will be the first flight ever on Mars, or really on another planet outside of our own. So it's it's another Wright brothers moment, but it's occurring on a world other than our own. So it is a huge step into pushing the forefront of technology and our capabilities, which is super exciting. And this is one of those missions that if we can show this kind of progress, so if we can show that we could take flight on another planet, it might open up the doors for other kinds of missions where maybe we're sending a bunch of different helicopters or a bunch of different drones and seeing just all the different kinds of science and things that we can do. You know, now with this current helicopter, as we get ready to fly it, but also in the future, you know, with different kinds of missions that we don't even know right now what this kind of technology and science can enable. So it is a really exciting time to see this thing take flight literally on another planet. Welcome to sunny Pasadena, California, where you'll find JPL nestled up against the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains. I'm Josh, and I'm a telecommunications engineer here at JPL. Let's talk about how our helicopter on Mars gets all of that really cool information that it's collecting back to us here on Earth. So I'm here in the dry stream bed known as the Arroyo Seco, just outside of JPL's campus. And it was here that years before Ingenuity was even a reality, that we spent weeks in the hot summer sun pushing temperatures of 46, 47 degrees Celsius, trying to understand exactly how our helicopter and our rover were going to talk to one another and interact with one another. Why out here, though? I'm glad you asked. As it turns out, the soil and rock conditions here in the Arroyo are actually very close to what we expect to see on Mars. And that is really good news for the engineers next door. So, how does our helicopter share all of those really cool pictures and all of that data that it's collecting with us here on Earth? Well, turns out we actually need the rover for that. Our helicopter is actually really small. It's a 10 centimeter cube, meaning that it's 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters in size. So since I don't have a helicopter actually to show you, since it's on Mars, instead for comparison, I've brought along my coffee mug. So there are a lot of things like motors, sensors, cameras, and batteries that have to fit into something the size of a coffee cup to even make our helicopter possible. In fact, most of that volume and mass is actually taken up by the batteries. After Ingenuity takes flight and collects some great pictures and science data, it actually depends on the rover to send that data back to Earth. Once that data is sent from Ingenuity to Perseverance, it is then relayed back to Earth through another spacecraft orbiting Mars. So, the data takes quite a path to get all the way from Ingenuity to us back here on Earth. But what about the path of the data on Mars? Well, turns out it's actually the shortest jump of the entire path, but it's probably the most tricky path. So at some point, our rover is going to say goodbye to our helicopter, or in this case, our coffee mug, gently place it down on the ground, and back away from it. But while they're close, they can still pretty easily talk to each other and have a normal conversation. But what happens when the rover will move about 1 kilometer away so that the helicopter has enough safety space to operate without hurting the rover? But what happens then? Are they going to be able to communicate? That's exactly why we came out here. If you look closely at all of the things protruding from the rover and the helicopter, you'll notice the antennas, or the ears, used to communicate between them. An antenna is the ear of any radio system. It's what turns those waves coming off of the air into electrical signals and vice versa. Turns electrical signals back into a wave that goes over the air. But much like our own ears, sometimes antennas can actually hear better in one direction versus another. The same is also true whenever the antenna is speaking. Much like if I'm facing the camera, it's easier to hear me, but if I turn away, you can't really hear me as well. So we wanted to see if our rover and our helicopter had an easier time talking to one another in one position versus another, and that is precisely why we set up our testing out here in our Mars environment. By coming out here and setting them up in what seems like Mars, we can get a sense for what orientation is really going to work better, and that way we can put them in the perfect position to talk to each other all the time. I'm so glad that you could join me to learn a little bit more about how Ingenuity and Perseverance are sharing all of the amazing photos and all of the amazing data that they're collecting and get that back to us.
This is the first time in the history of humanity, and we get to witness it. This is a very exciting time for everybody on Earth, for all of us, especially for people at the JPL, since you guys are the one that came up with it and that constructed it and programmed it, and now it's going to perform its first test flight on Mars, on another planet in our solar system. How important is it, the data that Ingenuity will receive and send back to Percy, and Percy send back to Earth? How important is that data, and what are we expecting from Ingenuity when it attempts, when it goes for the first time into the Martian air?
So I think some of the data that we expect, and I don't want to misspeak here because I'm not on the operations team for the helicopter. So, but some of the data that we're expecting, we're going to try and take some photos, and also there's some other data like LiDAR data where they're collecting altitude data as it's flying. There's also a couple other sensors on board, but I think really the big takeaway from this first flight is really just proving that it can actually take flight and fly on its own and take off and land on its own autonomously, and do that with some accuracy. And I think it's really exciting because this helicopter, it's not driven by somebody in real time here on Earth, meaning that somebody isn't in the control room here with a joystick and actually moving it back and forth. We actually send the rover and the helicopter a stack of commands essentially, and the helicopter itself actually goes, it executes those commands. So what that means is it's going to take off on its own, fly whatever profile we give it, which in the case of this first flight, it will just be taking off, going up, and coming back down, as far as I know. But what we'll do is we'll send it all those commands to say take off, go up in the air, hover for a little bit, and land. And the helicopter itself is going to do all of that itself without any kind of interaction with us. So by the time that it lands, it almost like entry, descent, and landing, as we talked before. Whenever the helicopter lands, we will probably just be getting some of that information back. So with that time delay, it'll be really interesting.
Govorimo da smo 10 godina unazad i da smo rekli da ćemo nekad možda letiti na Marsu, to bi možda zvučalo kao science fiction. Ali danas kada to spomenemo, to više nije science fiction, to postaje stvarnost. Možemo samo razmisliti o svim geološkim nalascima koje Ingenuity može da uradi. Možda u nekoj budućnosti, možda kada budu moguće ljudske misije na Marsu, šta znamo što može jedan takav Ingenuity da uradi? Možda prenijeti resurse s jednog na drugo mjesto, prenijeti ljude s jednog na drugo mjesto brže, izvidjeti tu geološku situaciju, naravno i prostudirati klimu, što je jedno također od najvažnijih komponenti, da kažemo, i ovog Perseverance rovera koji se trenutno nalazi na Marsu. Zašto je saznanja ili, da kažemo, o klimi, o načinu na koji su klimatske promjene na Marsu, te velike sandy storms, koji su oluje pjeska, pješčane oluje na Marsu. Zašto je važno da izvedimo? Zašto je važno da dobijemo te informacije sa Perseverance?
Važno je da razumemo kako se stvari u stvari dešavaju na Marsu. Ako ikada mislimo da čovek može da preživi u takvim uslovima, mi prvo moramo da razumemo kada se dešavaju ti uslovi, zašto se dešavaju i šta mi možemo da uradimo da bi omogućili, na primjer, život ljudi na Marsu, koji u ovom trenutku definitivno nije mogući. Ja mislim da u principu možda imamo neke delove tehnologije koje bi nešto omogućile, ali sigurno ne sve. Tako da je to je prvi korak. Prvo morate da razumete problem sa kojim se suočavate i tek onda kada ga dobro razumete možete da razmišljate o načinima na kojima taj problem može da se reši. A što se tiče života na Marsu, to je problem koji ima puno različitih strana i koji mora da se reši sa puno različitih stvari.
Mi smo još nekako negdje na tom početku razumijevanja Marsa, ali činimo dobre korake. Zahvaljujući ljudima kao što ste vi, Dragana, mnogo to znači. Mnogo znači, ne znam da li ste uopće svjesni koliko radite za čovječanstvo. Da li znate to uopće?
To je nešto što ja mislim ljudi kao ja uopšte ne razmišljaju o tome svakodnevno. Definitivno, jer kad imate tako neki teret, recimo, na svojim leđima, mnogo je teško u stvari uraditi neke stvari. Tako da mi pokušamo da zaboravimo te stvari, da se koncentrišemo na rešavanje problema. I to je ono što je inženjerima stvarno zanimljivo. Dati im problem koji oni sad imaju neku slobodu da reše, kako god oni zamisle. I to je ono što je veoma zanimljivo u ovom poslu u kojem ja radim, jeste da vi imate neku slobodu kako da sagledate sve te probleme i kako onda da ih rešite. I ja sebe definitivno ne smatram kao neko ko sad unapređuje čovečanstvo, ali definitivno je to veliki korak što se tiče tehnologije koju su ljudi sastavili.
Let's talk about ingenuity, and this is the newest news, as we can say. Last night, ingenuity was deployed on Mars, so we've made it. Perseverance brought ingenuity to the spot where it had to be deployed. It's deployed, and now Perseverance is moving back from ingenuity in order to have a safe test flight. How important is to have this test conducted on another planet, this first ever powered flight test in the history of humanity? Yvette?
Again, I say this, I think IJ said this in your first series. He said this is really, how we're brought together, how our community works around technology, what it teaches us is really just this call to action, and we're coming together to say, what is it that we can do to push the limits of our knowledge? How can we push the limits of our technology? And what we used to think was just a sci-fi movie, a lot of that has inspired what can be done. And a lot of those movies or sci-fi pop culture has taken from life and mimicked that to inspire. One thing is definitely giving us a forward advancement, like thwarting us into the future, what our technology can do, what are the possibilities of exploration. This will be we're watching history unfold, and as we see that and it works, then it inspires pushing the limit further, and then it inspires again, and with that science expands. So one thing is definitely giving inspiration to a whole generation or two or three to make sure they can contribute, and that in fact, if they're not going to go to Mars, they can certainly contribute in technology to getting others to Mars, or at least to exploring what are the possibilities, what's the historic relevance. So I think I have to say the butterfly effect is huge.
The butterfly effect is huge, and like we said, it is an exciting time. All this is happening right in front of us, and we are part of this history in making. This is only on itself very exciting. Shayla, what do you think about Ingenuity, a helicopter on Mars? It's deployed. It has to survive its first Martian night. That will be a challenging time. But when it conducts its first flight, do you think it's going to be successful?
These engineers that are behind this, I'm going to say the probability of success will be very great. Nothing's ever 100%, within doing engineering and doing testing on my own line of work. But I will definitely say I strongly believe that it's going to do its job. And it's really important to know about the aviation on Mars, because that's something that will help facilitate more research in a faster time. So I do think it's going to be successful because engineers behind it and future innovations that will come from that.
So among all the engineers, we have to mention all the women behind the projects as well, and taking you ladies in consideration as well. I mean, the team that is assembled, whether it's in public sector or private sector, is just amazing. And your work is so important as well. It's really important.
At this stage right now to separate the helicopter from the rover. So what's going to happen after that is once the helicopter has separated from the bottom of the rover and is onto the surface, there's going to be a checkout period to make sure that everything is okay with the helicopter and the rover, since the two of them will now be completely separate and on their own. But what's going to happen after that is the rover is going to drive away from the helicopter so that they have enough space between the two of them, so that the helicopter has its own area to operate in without posing any danger to the rover. But that drive away is going to take a little bit of time because the rover drives really, really slow. So I think along the way what you'll see is that as the rover drives away and separates itself from the helicopter, there's going to be also a couple, more health and status checks, but all of the scientists and engineers here really want to make sure that everything is healthy, everything looks good before actually taking flight. So my guess is if the date is April 11th, we will not see it before April 11th, but thereabouts or shortly after, I think we can expect to see it take flight.
You must be very excited yourself, Josh. I'm 100% sure.
Going to Mars is not Star Trek. It's not go where no man has gone before, as they say. It's really all about letting our planetary scientists be the pioneers, be the group that scouts the future and looks at resources that we can use on the planet. What are the things they need to know to be able to safely land, live, and return from Mars? The scientific knowledge, the technologies that we need that can make human exploration of Mars happen are within our grasp. In our lifetime, we actually can see humans land and work on Mars.
All right, now the big question, and everybody's discussing this. Chris, you and I met on Clubhouse, and we were in the room where we discussed this: human missions to Mars. Is it going to be possible in our lifetime? Now we're talking about science fiction that is no longer science fiction, it's becoming more reality.
Yeah, we were in the room where it happened, where we're talking about it. Now we're in another room talking about it, and I think it will become a reality in our lifetime. And the next step for us, as sort of a world, that you're going to see is we got the Perseverance rover on there. It's looking for signs of life. That's great. It's got a dozen science experiments on it. That are going to help us figure that out. The next thing that we have is called the Fetch rover. That's part of Mars sample return. And get this, Ika, for you and your audience, it is going to, so this 2020 Perseverance rover, it's drilling, coring rocks, leaving samples, things like that. The next one in a couple years, the Mars sample return, is we're going to have a smaller rover, maybe the size of a couple tricycles or things like that, and it's going to have to drive a lot faster and farther with this autonomy. It's going to pick up those tubules, collect them, bring them to a rendezvous point, launch them up into the atmosphere outside of Mars, and then fly them back from a spacecraft all the way back to Earth. And yes, that's ambitious, but if we can pull those types of investments off, and as the technology starts to mature in some of these areas for EDL autonomy, all of these types of things need to happen. And if they're demonstrated, yes, I do believe you will see in our lifetime, maybe in the 2030s, humans on Mars. That's what we're getting ready for, and we're already showing the principal elements to kind of get there.
Would you go to Mars?
Would I go? I have a family, and I wouldn't be sure when the next time I would see them would be. So I'll tell you what, if my family comes with me, I'll go. And but they got to let us all go. So I got all my 3 kids and my wife, and my 2 dogs, we all got to go.
That's the only way to go.
I believe anything is possible. And I have to say, in the last 2 to 5 years alone, we have defied the possibilities that we had dreamt of in the last decade. So I think it's possible. you know, when we talk about getting to Mars, there's a difference between arriving and thriving and living long term. And I think we have to think of those separately as milestones. So certainly I think in our lifetime, I mean, I'm in my mid-40s and I'm very hopeful that I will see it in my lifetime, contact. But thriving is another whole set of planning and dreaming. But I'm going to tell you, I never say never. And I never say you never can do something, because I've seen so many things become a reality in my lifetime. So I'm really hopeful.
And we're seeing it now with Ingenuity, with Moxie experiment, with all the firsts that even Perseverance brings with itself, with herself. As, let's say, Shayla, if humans go to Mars, if that would be an option, there are a lot of obstacles that we would have to overcome. First of all, radiation, right? Deep space travels. There is a psychological aspect that that's not much talked about, but we should talk about that. What other obstacles would be there in order for humans to go to travel deep space and go for deep space explorations?
So my take on this is, you know, you kind of mentioned all the big factors and the little stuff, the educational aspect. People talk about, you know, younger people being a part of the space industry, commercial space industry. So I think the humanization of it, the humanity of it, and that in my personal opinion, tackling as I tackle education through the K through University, I will say the psychological aspect of it, because any adversity or any hardships can be gotten through, if you have the right mind for it and the right team for it. And sometimes people will have those mental setbacks, but if you have a team on your side to kind of get you out of that, or even in your own resiliency, I think that they can get through anything and any hardships that Mars brings to people, whether it's the soil, the toxic soil, the toxic environment of just being isolated. So yeah, I think psychology and working together. So.
Dragana, da li vjerujete da će biti u budućnosti moguće ljudske misije ka Marsu i da li mislite da bi se to moglo desiti u našem vijeku, da kažem životnom vijeku?
Ja se iskreno nadam da će to biti moguće. Zašto? Zato što ćemo morati, kao što sam rekla, morat ćemo da rešimo sve te probleme, a to je ono zašto mi živimo, da rešavamo probleme. I ja se iskreno nadam da će biti moguće. Da li će biti moguće u toku naših života, recimo u toku mog života, nisam baš sigurna. Problemi sa kojima se mi suočavamo na Marsu i životom na Marsu su veoma ozbiljni i neke stvari koje nisu uopšte jednostavne da se reše. Ja ću vam reći samo nekoliko stvari koje su meni, na primjer, koje ja smatram kao velike prepreke. Prva stvar je, na primjer, radijacija. Radijacija na Marsu je takva, pošto Mars u stvari nema atmosferu kao što recimo Zemlja ima, da nas štiti od radijacije koja dolazi od Sunca. Ljudi jednostavno ne bi mogli da prežive u takvoj sredini. Druga stvar jeste da su temperature jako niske. To je možda nešto što bi mi mogli da prevaziđemo, ali još uvek recimo za ljude, za mašine to je veoma moguće. Za ljude živete na minus 60 stepeni Celzijusa nije baš jednostavno. I isto tako procenat kiseonika je veoma, veoma mali. To znači da ljudi ne bi mogli da dišu.
0,02 ili 0,2%, čini mi se, je li tako?
Veoma mali, da. Što znači da mi ne bi mogli da preživimo u takvim uslovima. Ali, na primjer, Perseverance sa sobom nosi Moxie. Moxie je jedan instrument koji će pokušati da proizvede kiseonik od tog vazduha koji se nalazi na Marsu. I vidjet ćemo da li će to biti moguće. I onda ćemo moći da gradimo na toj tehnologiji Moxija, da vidimo da li je moguće proizvoditi kiseonik u većoj količini, nešto što bi moglo čoveka da održi. I to su samo neke od stvari sa kojim se mi suočavamo kad recimo stignemo na Mars. Ali prva stvar jeste, mi treba da stignemo na Mars. Do sada ljudi su stigli do Meseca i to je nekoliko dana putovanja, recimo, ili do svemirske stanice koja nam je još i bliže do koje sada može da se stigne u roku od recimo 6-7 sati, što je neverovatno. Do Marsa nam treba 7 meseci. Staviti ljude u neku kapsulu koja je veoma mala i reći im da treba da idu 7 meseci tako, to je veoma nezgodno i još uvek ne znam da imamo rešenje za to.
I taj psihološki efekat koji treba da prevaziđemo.
Apsolutno.
Zato se astronauti nevjerovatne snage i prolaze kroz teške psihološke testove. Nije samo, da kažemo, taj fiziološki dio bitan kada je u pitanju radijacija, pa ajde imamo svemirska odijela na koje možemo da mislimo, pa eto na Marsu bismo možda mogli razmišljati da idemo i ispod površine kako bi se zaštitili od radijacije. Ali taj dugi put do Marsa također nosi sa sobom i te psihološke efekte o kojima trebamo razmišljati.
You know, a good scientist will tell you, when they don't know an answer to something, there are a lot of great solutions right now. People are looking at different types of suits. There's lots of studies that are going on at multiple space agencies to see if they can only, say, reduce those types of radiation effects. There's both the body physical effects, the mental effects, and then there's just also, what do you do? Is it draining in terms of energy? Does it cause people, again, mentally not to want to, to feel even increasingly isolated and things like that? And then what are some ways, not just, again, bodily, physically, but what are some mental and other technology ways that we can provide, so that when people are up there, when we do have our explorers that are going to Mars, that we can support them. I don't have the silver bullet answer, but I know that the people that, we're in these rooms talking to, I'm sure we're going to get there. So
it's amazing how people that are not even part of NASA or SpaceX or any other space agency outside of the United States, how many ideas they have and how they share those ideas. It's just amazing that people are so interested and they have such passion for space exploration. Chris, I would like to talk to you about space governance. One of the other questions that we see a lot of disagreements on. How do we govern ourselves on a different planet? Right now, there have been some suggestions of how that should look like, but should that also be on an international level, or how do we, even when it comes to mining, who gets the license? How do we govern all that? Those are all the big questions we still have a couple of years to talk about those, but what are the first steps? What are the suggestions that you would have at this point?
Yeah, Ika, that's a good question. And for me, it starts with international cooperation and also realizing that space as a domain is a big frontier. And it's not a little place. Everyone wants to make and put something in a box and make it smaller because that makes it easier to kind of have your frame of reference and have your way and get your outcomes that you want. Space is a big place. There's enough things for everybody, so that's sort of number one. There's enough, minerals to mine. There's enough sort of not land to grab, but, places to kind of, colonize and populate eventually and things like that. If you look at it as a big place, and we treat it from that perspective and cooperation, that's sort of the start. The second is there's a lot of focus right now, too, on being out in space and being a good actor in space. So that's another thing, is that we need to kind of make sure that everyone's being a good actor, out there with both the assets that we have, but also not a lot of people realize there's a lot of orbital stuff in space. There's a lot of junk and debris, that's out there. There's a great, if you Google orbital debris, and you click on the image thing in Google, you can see sort of, everyone imagines just the Earth and there's kind of like nothing around it. Or, maybe there's a couple hundred satellites and stuff. Go Google orbital debris and click on images. You'll see the Earth is surrounded at various levels by junk and exactly. It's surrounded by all this stuff. And so being good actors, helping to make sure that the debris is sort of managed, making sure that there's enough space for developing nations to be able to get their things out there, looking at small sats, CubeSats, and universities, commercial industry, people being able to get these smaller things out in there. Again, there's a lot of space, between low Earth orbit to, the moon, to L2, to deep space. There's a lot of space out there for people to. So again, starting from international cooperation, starting from being a good actor, realizing, you know, again, that we're, to be honest, it's, to borrow a phrase, in this together, you know, and then we can work together on it. That's how I would approach, you know, the issue.
So this is a great question. This is the existential question we all ask ourselves. It doesn't matter if you're an engineer, if you're a pure scientist, a botanist, you're a human. And so as humans, we are curious about, are we going to take our Earth baggage to Mars? Are we going to take our Earth baggage to the moon? And the fundamental agreement is, of course we are, we're human. But then what do we do here on Earth to prepare for a long-term behavior that keeps us alive? And that's what's really important. We're learning a lot in analogs that take place on Earth, which analogs are any simulation that pretends to be, you know, as closely aligned to what the moon would be like and what it would be like to live or explore Mars. And we explore, one, definitely our human behavior to live together in a confined space. And I have to say, we have so many lessons from Earth. We even host on Clubhouse, like you mentioned, these calls to action, these conversations we're having are to address answers, solutions. How will we behave together? What can we do better? How can we improve? And how are we going to last? And those conversations are critical to really form policy, regulations. Are we going to all behave? Who defines behavior? It's a lot of heavy things to consider.
Ono što bih ja, recimo, idealistično želela jeste da mi možemo da naučimo iz toga šta se dešava ovde na zemlji i šta se nama kao čovečanstvu dešava i da ne ponovimo te iste greške. I bar za mene to znači da je neko ujedinjeno razmišljanje jedino to koje bi nas dovelo do toga da mi u stvari budemo bolji na nekoj planeti nego što smo ovde. Ali naravno to neće zavisiti od ljudi kao što sam ja, to će zavisiti od drugačijih ljudi. Ali kažem nešto što bi meni bilo drago jeste da mi neke lekcije koje se nadam da smo naučili ovde dobro prisvojimo i ne ponovimo iste greške kao što smo to uradili ovde.
To bi bilo divno. Wishful thinking možda nije ni tako loše.
We all sort of weren't, you know, people in Serbia or people in the United States or whatever. We were earthlings, right? At that point, kind of coming together. So it has sort of a, you know, world feel for people, you know, to make these types of technology investments, especially during difficult times.
Hopefully we will be more inclusive as a humanity when it comes to going to a different planet. And these are, again, all the questions that we have to answer all together. And I believe contributing, everybody, all of us, even those who are not in space industry, people who are in media, people who are in different industry, can contribute to this amazing mission that is for all of humanity. I would like to believe that space is all inclusive. Do you ladies agree?
Yes,
definitely.
Okay. Thank you so much for doing all this for us and for sharing all this information and being so transparent about Perseverance rover mission of NASA. You've done really great, and we are really thankful to have you on this team, Mars and us. Thank you, Josh, for being with us once more.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Josh. NASA's JPL's communications engineer, Josh Miller, was with us. I'm Ika Ferreira-Gotić. Thank you for watching.
Indicate.
Goes as a skirt, and I just tucked it in and created a blouse because they don't have a blouse yet.
They're mighty things. Kako ste vi proživjeli upravo tih 11 minuta terora i dijela?
Bilo je veoma uzbudljivo, ali moram da vas ispravim, bilo je 7 minuta, tako da smo skratili
7 minuta.
7 minuta.
7 minuta.
7 minuta i to je skoro u sekundu.
I know a lot of things, but I don't know everything.
You know everything.
Talk to Daddy, and then I come down.
Short and sweet and to the point. Good job. Thanks.
And we're seeing significant deceleration.
Indicate shoot deploy.
The navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed and we are seeing significant deceleration.
We're getting signals from MRO.
Tango Delta.
Touchdown confirmed.